Thank you all for joining the 22nd already Triple ID conversation. We will be recording it, and we've set up Zoom in a way that the names of the attendants will not be visible in the recording. So hopefully that will be okay. The recording will be on the Triple ID YouTube channel soon, where you can also see the previous 21 conversations. We'll start with a presentation or a conversation with David for 20-25 minutes, maybe half an hour, and have a question and answer session after that. And we stop exactly in 56 minutes, exactly at the hour. Let me very briefly introduce David. His slides is actually telling more than I would like to say. He originally came from the United Kingdom, moved to Australia a long time ago, had several functions in different universities in Australia, but his main role was the director of the Communication Research Institute. And it's worth mentioning that David has published a lot about information design, and most recently a book about semiotics that we will briefly discuss in the next 20 minutes. As a preparation, I had sent David 6 questions, and David has structured his presentation following these 6 questions. So I think the easiest way is to just barge in immediately and ask his first question. Which information design methods are the most effective, David? Is that a good start?
I'm going to be very bigoted at this moment and say that the best ones I know of are the ones we use ourselves. But I think it's important to say why I make that claim. And so I've put together just a little list of some of the achievements we've had. And just for those of you who know me, you're probably very familiar with all of this, but just in case there are people there who don't, we set up the Institute in 1985, and we were very lucky because, well, I don't know about lucky, I was actually invited by government, business and the arts and the university to develop a new and effective method for communication between organizations and the public. The government at the time was doing its very best to try and be a little more compassionate and acknowledging of the audience they had and the relationship between themselves and the audience. And so this, the requirement to set up the Institute came really from the very top. And business, the arts followed, and we were invited basically to look at the methods that were used by government and other organizations in the way they communicated with the public. And top of their list, by the way, at that stage happened to be forms. And of course, because there'd been quite a lot of work done before us by people like Rob Waller, and other people in the US and so on, we had a lot of precedents to be able to draw on. So we suggested that as one of the first areas we would look at. The Institute was actually founded in 1987, and until then we really didn't have a clear constitution, as it were. What we had was basically the promise of some desks and an account in which we could put money or have money taken out of at the university that hosted us. And that was the University of Canberra at that time. And it was in the opening stages of our involvement with them, very generous towards us. So that generosity, however, very quickly changed when they told us that all of the income we were going to generate, they would take 40%. and at which point we decided that perhaps we would be better, because we were having quite a few inquiries and interesting projects going on at that stage. We became an independent body. We stayed in Canberra, and we continued at the local government area, we moved over to the ANU campus, which was much more sympathetic and much more salubrious. In fact, our offices were right over a pub, which was one of the nicest pubs in Canberra at that time. Anyway, that was where we went to, and we formally set up the institute from that point, and it became the Communication Research Institute, which is what it's called today. So from 1987 onwards, we just had a constant stream of interest in what we were doing. So 300 organizations collaborated with us. And that really helped us get moving and gave us lots of opportunities, so that by 1990, we produced our first case history, and that we were able to write up in IDJ, and it's still there for everyone to see. And it's a bit of a landmark, both for us, I think, and information more generally. So we went on from there with all the organizations we worked to go through each one and develop and refine the methods we were using, so that by the time we got to about 1990, and published our first, first case history, we were really developing in a very strong way, not just with the organizations we started with, which were major government departments and business, but we also started to do some pro bono work, and of course we were continually refining the methods we used. So what we are today is basically a not-for-profit NGO. We still have good relations with the institutions we work for, but we are actually independent of them. Very broadly, our mission is to do no harm, and we particularly took account of that because we were asked to do things like medicine information, and we felt that we had to have a very strong ethic about what we did. So we had to kind of, we're not in the business of corrupting people or killing them or doing anything like that. And we've stuck very much to that particular thing. So our mission, as I say, is to do no harm. And we added to that, bring a quiet dignity to ordinary life. We could see what was going to unfold before us, particularly in relation to the new technology, which was going to be very difficult for it not to take away the quiet dignity of the ordinary life. And so we stood out apart from that because it was a very difficult kind of area to work in. And we have since then been doing a lot of publishing work, but always on an ad hoc basis, never as an activity in itself. And so in the next year, we're actually going to start our publishing program. And bear in mind that we have a backlog of quite a few hundred case histories, none of which have seen the light of day. And with good blessing and good kindness of the people who commissioned us. And at that time, of course, everything was done commercial in confidence, even if they were a public service organisation. But we will knock on their doors and say, now we want to start publishing this material.
Okay,
So
David, shall we move on?
Yes, please.
Please. Continue with the second slide. I think it might be the easiest to go through.
Okay, so what we came up with was a fairly, and this was after many projects. This is not something we had on day one, but we did develop a methodology, if you like, a set of methods, and broadly that's what that diagram is about. And again, we have published some of that, but there are a lot of things in there which we never really developed in any public literature, mainly because we felt it would be much better if it was presented as a whole. So we started out, and as you can see there, we did approximately 20 plus scoping investigations in each of the projects we did. And that went through the whole gamut of stakeholders, problems of regulation that affected all the organizations, whether they were public or private, issues to do with how they were going to produce things, and so on. In talking about stakeholders, what we actually did was far more than the clients would necessarily ask us to do. They wanted, obviously, to keep everything in-house, but we insisted that we had to consult much more widely than that. And we had to develop special ways of doing this so that people wouldn't lose their temper with each other. But I might have a chance to talk about that later. But scoping was a very important area for us to do work in. Come on now, move.
Yep.
Right, yes. Now, we developed a lot of specific methods to do the baseline measurement. And one of the things that came out of the scoping was we would ask every single one of our stakeholders, what do you want people to do with this information? You know, you've asked us to design a suite of forms. What do you want from the people who are going to try and fill these in? And if it was medical information, what are the various things you want people to be able to do with the medicine? And note we spoke very much in terms of getting what we wanted people to do. We never went to the question of what do you want us to write in this book. That came very much later in any project. So that was a very important starting point. And when we got to the baseline measurement stage, we developed a particular method of testing. And again, although we've published a little bit about that, we've got a lot more to share with everyone about that, which I'm looking forward to, because we would like to see this much more widely used. Anyway, that was then, and what we did, we got a list from the stakeholders about everything they wanted people to do with the information, and we built the testing around that. So basically we went out and said to people, can you understand this particular paragraph? Can you use this particular page here, and what would you do with it, and so on. So it was all very much performance-based, if you like. It was about people finding the way, us finding out whether they could perform the task we asked of them. And that was very important to us. Now, it's somewhat covered by the lovely people who are sitting on the left-hand side here. Is it the left-hand side? No, it's the right-hand side, actually.
Yeah.
If we could move them, because what you're missing there is a delightful picture of the kind of errors we were getting, or at least the quantity of errors we would pick up during any diagnostic testing, and they were numerous. Typically, we wouldn't be able to put them on one page like that, but you can see the tips of them, and the FAU standing out is fault. Okay. And they were just littered with faults.
We have to speed up a little bit, if you don't mind.
Right, okay, yep, I'm moving on quickly. Okay, so, here we go. Oh, we have moved quickly. Good Lord. Okay, we'll move on to that. Now, one of the other things we introduced that was something of a novelty was we introduced the process of monitoring the material once it was produced and out there with the public. And this was fascinating because we thought, well, we've spent a year working on this, we've tested, retested. I think for the tax form we produced, we did something like 20 plus iterations till we got it to the point where everyone was happy with it. A small footnote there, the leader of the tax office had a copious folio put in front of him with all the reasons why we did things, and we asked him to look through that very carefully before he offered to make any changes. To which his reply was, "It's my bloody form, and if I want to change it, I will." And that was a portent to the extent to which politics would find its way into the work we did, whether we wanted it or not. So that was what we found. But we found something else. We found that as time went on, with every single document we've monitored, their performance deteriorated. And this was quite fascinating because we hadn't expected it to be quite like that. And in fact, with one of the documents we produced, which was a telephone bill, when they came back to us and asked us to redo it, it had deteriorated to the point where we had found ourselves when we started the project for them some 5 years earlier. It's a fascinating business, that, and we had not realized that that was going to happen. And we had to say to our clients, who were paying us very handsomely, look, you know that you need to look after your investment, because if you don't, it's just going to deteriorate in value. So anyway, that was a very important step for us.
Right. Shall we move to the book, this one? Yes. What's how do insights from semiotics actually help information design
practice? We are now rapidly moving into semiotics. Yes. Having told you how good we are as information designers.
Very briefly, what's the direct relation between semiotics and information design?
Well, I've always been interested in that area because I got involved in symbol design very early on with people like Ron Easterby at University in Birmingham and various other people as well. And I also then got involved in the local standards association, and we developed a set of standards for them for actually doing information design. But at the back of my mind was always the thought that we really need to look at some of the underlying ideas for this area. And it was a very difficult task, very difficult, wading through incredibly arcane stuff, incredibly arcane. But we could gather enough from it to be able to start thinking about writing about it. And I started writing about it back in, I suppose, about the 1980s. And there are some publications that I wrote at that time, which are part of publications I wrote for IDJ at that time. Anyway, Ruth, my wife, and I have always worked together. She's very shy and doesn't like, as you may gather, being in the limelight at all. In fact, she's disappeared entirely, I think. But she and I have worked together throughout most of this stuff. So really a lot of the credit goes to her. And we decided at one point that we really should write a book about it and also relate that book to information design. And we thought most of the stuff we'd read was so awful and tortured that let's see if we could reinvent it. So that's what we basically set ourselves to do. A very bold and dangerous thing. It took us 4 years to write it. But I'm pleased to say, while there were many turbid moments in it, we are still married, and very happily so. So that's what we did. And particularly, I thought there is a corner in this which is highly relevant to plain English. It's relevant to plain English, but it's relevant to information design as well. So we did quite a lot of work trying to sort of, and also put it in a language which was less esoteric than what we had encountered in our reading. So we progressed on that. And a number of things came out of that which are very important. If I can get this thing to move on. Come on, here we go. Right. Now, what I'd like you all to do, and we're beginning the class now, make a note on what you think it is you're looking at. Okay? Now, you may have seen this, in which case all of what you're going to do now is irrelevant, but because you know where it's heading. But if you can look at that, and as I say, describe what it is, let's move on to the next. If we can get it. Here we go. That is your second picture. Okay, now look at that very carefully, and we're going to go back to where you were. Okay. And you should, by now, be able to write down what it is and get rid of the piece of paper on which you scribbled before. Now, the importance about this is the notion of projection. And one of the things we've discovered, both in our own research and by looking at other people's research, I nearly knocked over a full glass of water there. What we found is that that was incredibly relevant to information design. Because all of us do that kind of projection. We look at material, and because we think we have, or we actually have some knowledge about it, then we dive into it and say, oh yes, I know about that. The epiphany for us in working with that is when you do testing. And you're sitting there and you suddenly realize that what you are looking at is not what the person sitting next to you is looking at. And they're looking at it from a totally different point of view. So in a sense, they haven't got the benefit of our little sketch of the cow. They are just looking at messy sheets of paper. Okay, and we have to do something about that. very important stuff. And as I say, if you don't do the kind of testing we've done, you never realize this. You don't realize. You wouldn't get it out of a questionnaire. You certainly don't get it out of doing focus groups. So the only thing we've found that works for us is diagnostic testing. So, moving on. One of the ideas I want to talk about, and I'm going to make it very short because otherwise I could talk forever on this particular topic. We wanted to get some way of giving the whole business of making marks and making them mean something. We wanted to give that a kind of identity of its own. And we came up in kind of true Kantian fashion with our version of an a priori. And that is that with everything we do, we always look at it and say, I wonder if we could use it for something else. Okay? And language is like that. You know, we use a word like a rose to describe a plant, but we also use the word rose to talk about the woman I love. Now, what we're doing there is creating a stand for relation. And that stand for relation seems to be a core feature of something that is common to all of us as human beings. I mean, it may be that some animals can do it as well, but we most definitely can. And the interesting point about it is that it is both anarchic and creative. Okay? If I want to turn this mobile phone into a secret diary, okay, there you are, I have done it. And I'm not going to tell you what's in there. There you go. Okay, that's letness. I've just said, let this thing that really looks like a mobile phone actually be a secret document. And we do that in all of our design work, of course. We look at something and the whole alphabet is full of examples of letness. The sounds we use, words we use, etc., etc. What I'm showing you in that diagram there is an example of letness, and it's 35,000 years ago. We don't know what those marks mean, but the one thing that seems relatively certain is that those marks were made by a human being, and they were made for a purpose. In other words, they had the ability then of letness. They could say, this stands for something, and we don't know what it is. How many buffaloes we've killed this year, how many full moons we've had, we don't know. But we knew it stood for something else. And that makes it very, I think, interesting. And by the way, there are plenty of examples like that. Okay, the other thing we did is look at the various models of communication we have, and we decided there to rethink quite a lot of that. And both Ruth and I put a lot of work into that. First time I used it, which I think it, by the way, went utterly unread or unnoticed, was when I wrote the book Learning and Visual Communication. And I start there by using the idea of not just a text, not just a message, okay, but an author message and a reader message. And these were basic units. You couldn't rip them apart because you can't have a message without a reader. You leave a piece of writing on the moon and it's no longer a message because there's no one to read it. And reading or writing or authoring is a basic part of semiotics as an indivisible part. In other words, that's our basic unit of analysis. So we haven't got the luxury ever of saying, I think I'll go and review that text. Well, you might review that text, but actually as a critic, you're looking over your shoulder and you're looking, of course, to find out what the author was about, okay? So we have an author text and we have a reader text. And whenever we talk about texts or messages, we really have to include the people who are using them, not by any kind of act of science so much as because that's the world we live in, that's the world we have to work in. Okay, so we have these new words, author text and reader text. And as I say, a message only exists as a message when it is written or read. Okay, the other thing we came across, and this was something that partly came out of the work we'd been doing on the testing and monitoring, but also more broadly, and that is that we discovered that in some respects, communication is unpredictable and non-predictable. Now, I won't go into the finer points between those two, but you can blame letness for a lot of it. In other words, I can say, well, I'm not going to use that word in that way. I'm going to use it in a different way. Okay, and we all do that, and it makes life much more interesting as well as confusing. So there's unpredictability and non-predictability all the time within communication, and that's something I think which we should not only cherish but actually bring to the fore and build on. Okay, prototyping. Prototyping is the business of trying to make something that will work. I'm going to move quickly on from that. Okay, and then move on to what I think is the last part of what I want to say in any detail, is that what we want to happen in the next 10 years is I would like to see our research used in teaching and research much more than it is now. And we will help that through our publishing program. And in 10 years' time, we need real design instead of rituals. And I'll go on from that. Doesn't look as though I'm going anywhere. Let me just go back.
It's okay. Just
missed bits here. I'm terribly sorry.
Go to the last slide.
Machine doesn't want to talk to people. There was a lot more to be said on prototyping. But as we've got this diagram, again, you need to look behind here. You'll notice how we have grayed out scoping, baseline measurement, and monitoring. And we've chucked the testing and refining over to the side there. The reason why we've done that is that I put it to you that this is what ritual looks like. Okay? And there are a lot of people out there who go from prototyping to implementing without doing any of these other things. Many of them work in design studios. Okay? Increasingly, with artificial intelligence at their side, they do it even more so, because they're not even designers. So that's, I think, the world we're moving into. And we, I think, are going to find ourselves fighting to keep that going. And it will become a very important part of our life. So I think we're facing what I call in the title of the paper, we are between ritual and reality. And in many ways, rituals are, we can equate rituals for centuries. Rainmaking ceremonies is one of my favorite descriptions of a rainmaking ceremony. And the fact of the matter is that sooner or later it will rain immediately after a rainmaking ceremony. And the entire tribe will look at that and say, see, it really does work. We have advertising that thrives on that principle. When people in advertising agencies are collecting their stakeholders together, particularly their clients, they have a procedure which is called buy-in. All right? They get their clients to buy in. If you doubt me, have a look in Google, have a look at the term buy-in, and you'll see exactly what I mean. The purpose of this is so that they agree with you as the manufacturer of your wonderful prototype that it will work. When they come away and are disappointed, they share your sorrow, but they don't leave you. You know, we're all responsible for it, but we'll do better next time. And rainmaking ceremonies are much the same as that. He says, you know, I'm terribly sorry it didn't this time. The omens, the gods let us down badly, but we'll produce something really very much better next time, which will get them making the rain clouds fall. So I think this is the challenge before us. It's all, I mean, we've had it for many, many centuries. People have produced something and said, the public will understand it, you know, and just shoved it out the door. And when the public didn't understand it, it is the public's fault. It's not your fault or my fault, it's the public's fault. And that is where I think we have to become a lot more wary. And I think some of the things I've talked about today help us get there. Anyway.
David, thanks very much for this slightly extended introduction. Shall we move to some, I really enjoyed it. Shall we move to some questions? If anybody want to ask some questions, because we've got about 20 minutes, who would like to move on from this to a few questions?
Yes, by all means. I'm just saying, Carol also asked me what I thought would be appropriate for the next 10 years. And of course, it's entirely self-congratulatory about the future before us.
Any questions?
I really would like to see our work used in teaching and research. I've had some experience of doing that with university students, and it is wonderfully satisfying. The only problem with it is getting over the hurdle of, what do they call them now? Ethics committees. That's right. See, if you're going to do any testing as part of by being an academic, very, very dangerous ground, and diagnostic testing wouldn't even pass the first post. So that's a challenge, but we do find ways around that. But I think there's a lot there for students to gain, particularly once they've done it, they can see the value in it, and they enjoy doing it. And what I would like to see is somehow, and this is where one sort of hope springs eternal, that we need really more real design instead of rituals. I think we're dominated by rituals in our life, and it would be nice to change that. If not in everything, certainly in some of the important things we all have to deal with. Anyway, questions?
Anyone?
I've got a question. Hi, David, Rob. Just about your model, which is up on the screen in front of us. Baseline measurement. Do you mean measurement, or do you just mean the normal sort of research phase we'd all go through, finding out what's going on, where the problems are, and so on? And then later you have monitoring, which I take to mean kind of measuring again against the baseline. Is that right?
Yes, yes, that's right.
The reason I'm asking is just my own experience is that I find it almost impossible to get clients to pay for monitoring. And I'll tell you the reason. It's because when you've spent a lot of money on, and I think we did a lot of very similar work to you on system produced documents. In other words, the design was the output was personalized phone bills and things like that for every customer. Everyone slightly different. So everything we did required was part of a massive IT project on which they might have spent millions of dollars. So when it comes to monitoring, we'd say, right, we now want to monitor whether this is working, and it'll cost you some money. They would say, no way. We've just spent 2 million on a new billing system, and not our fee, by the way, on the system. And we don't want anything that risks, telling us it's not working, because I fought for that budget, and I'm no way am I going back to my boss and say it's not working. We can all see that it's working. It's much better. Everyone's happy. Let's not go there. Have you had that sort of experience?
Look, I know exactly what you're saying. We kind of either use the get out of jail card for that, or we put it in the proposal to begin with very clearly, and we cost it at that stage. Or what we do is we teach them how to do it.
Yes, doesn't mean they'll do it.
The third option is the one we prefer.
Right, yes.
Because it really is their property and they are the ones who should look after it. One of the things I say to them is, well, you've just spent $250,000 on this. The value of our service to you is probably now worth about $2 million a year. If you don't do this, the value of the investment will deteriorate. And I show them graphs to show how quickly it will deteriorate. Yeah. Some come to the party, others don't. And for the same reasons as you've given. We've just wasted a lot of money. Sorry, we haven't wasted it, but we've spent a lot of money, and it's not so. We're not going to do that. The other thing is, I find people will say to us quite candidly, "Oh, we don't want you to do any testing, not during the the baseline measurement stage, certainly not testing and refining. No, we don't want any of that. We just want you to go from the beginning to the end. Do not stop, do not go to jail, etc." And we basically say, well, you've chosen the wrong people to do your work then.
I'm going to offer an anecdote about testing, which is when we redesigned the passport form, which had huge numbers of errors coming back, and we ran a massive pilot testing it, and it proved it to be so successful that they would have had to make 1,000 civil servants redundant because that was the proportion of people employed with dealing with errors in forms, and they couldn't face that. So they didn't use the design. They used only part of the design enough of the design that would achieve their target of 5% improvement.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, all the motives within client organizations and the realities they have to deal with are very unpredictable by designers.
Yeah.
I can see that Giuseppe has his hand raised for a question, comment.
Hi, David. We met a very long time ago in a Triple D conference. I don't know if you remember. By the way, I'm glad.
I recognize you. Yes, yes.
Good to see you. So I'm very interested in your last sentence of this slide. And I would like if you can develop on this. In 10 years' time, we need real design instead of rituals. So it's just a sentence, but it's so dense. I would like to ask you.
Yeah, yeah. But one of the barriers to this, by the way, is current teaching in design often gives students the sense that they are somehow gods, that they have been entered into a particular Masons group which can do no wrong. And when we say, well, we're going to take this out and test it, I've had quite a lot of difficulty with members of staff who have come from a background where, we know what we're doing. We were taught how to do it. And unfortunately, and it leads to some difficulty. And that's such an opportunity lost when people have that attitude, because we all get things wrong. And designers are not accepted from that. And you miss the opportunity. And it's the one thing that we always say when we come back from testing. The first thing we ask each other is, what struck you? Not did everyone, succeed or what, but what struck you? And it usually is a point where people say, do you know, I never realized they'd even look at it in that way, or some such thing. And of course, in doing that, we have all gained an insight into something very important. So there are lots of barriers to that. And I think the old-fashioned art-based training, which, comes very much out of the old-style art school. I'm a painter. I don't talk about what I'm doing. I just do it. Is not acceptable, really, not acceptable. So anyway, but it is an issue, and there are a lot of design schools that resist it, not just in information design or graphic design, but across a whole spectrum of design courses. And I think that is breaking down, because a lot of designers these days have suddenly realized that they're living in societies which actually need care and attention, and they want to be involved in that. God knows how, because many of them haven't got necessary skills to do that. I mean, they first need to do a lot of work in the area of politics before they're even capable of going out and talking to ordinary people. And I don't mean politics in the kind of big sense of the word, but in the micro sense of it, because people keep power. And one of the reasons why we've had to do very careful work when we do our testing with, our engagement with stakeholders, is actually to not get caught by that. and very often, it happens. And we've had people where we haven't done that, but they have got to the point where the project we were doing was going to take away his superannuation payment. And he was in a sufficient, he thought that was the case. Actually, it wouldn't have been the case. But he never talked to us about it. And the next thing we knew is that they'd spent $250,000, paid the check, and with something half finished, and just asked us to walk out the door. It does happen. So I think the political side of this is always there, and it would be nice if we didn't really have to deal with it, but we do.
Veronica?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, just a comment on the approach with students. I remember Bob Swinehart, former IIID president, and he taught at Carnegie Mellon University. And he said there are always a few students who get it. And once they've got the information design bug, it will never leave them.
Yes.
Because this moment of understanding how much you get out of talking to people and taking on the testing and methods, that's a magic moment. And that kind of doesn't leave us for the rest of our professional lives.
Yes.
So, but how to get to projects that enable students to experience that's the challenge.
Yeah. I think some students are very motivated in that direction. I once did a paper, well, not a paper, but gave a lecture at a university. And I focused the entire lecture on work we had done on telephone bills. And I thought, they're going to fall asleep in this. This is not going to be. But they didn't. And one of them came up to me afterwards and said, that was fascinating. I never thought that we could be designing that sort of thing. And it was the ordinariness of it that had attracted her, and the awfulness of it, which we all have to put up with. So I think there's certainly ways into that. But, from afar, a lot of students and a lot of academics sort of just dismiss it. It's not as good as designing a logo.
One thing, in Lucerne, where I teach in Switzerland, hopefully in April or May, we will have a full week course on listening and asking questions. So we focus on first 2 days is listening to people and what we actually hear, and the different ways of interpreting what people say in your own language, by your own people, but not by people who are 50 years old and speak a different language, but by students themselves and by staff. And the second course, that's stems me very hopeful, because it actually is a progress within the university. We got the opportunity and the money to give a week workshop.
Yes.
But the second course that actually you didn't mention yet, but is the course on power relations and politics. And I'm not sure if it's taught anywhere in the university. How can we make sure that students, every design is disruptive and disrupts the power relations between people? You give, and what you said earlier on, do no harm, means that you give patients the opportunity and the power to go and get into a dialogue with medical staff. I want to have a course on power relations and politics, but I don't know where to start. What do you suggest?
It's one of the things I've found very useful in this is from actually my own research, where how we talk about text and authors and text and readers. At the back of every person's head when they're looking at information is who's the person at the other end? Who is it? So, for example, we were once doing a project with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, quite a long project. We actually redesigned the whole procedure for developing forms for surveys and census and so on. And one of the things we looked at, and this was quite a micro thing, they did census for particular industries. And one of the ones they did was for farmers. And we found out through the testing we were doing that the farmers, when they did their filling in of the nice form given to them, by the people from the ABS, also had a copy of their tax form adjacent to it. And they said, we've got to be very careful here and make sure that what we've entered in our tax form is what goes into the census of our production. And we said, why is that important? He said, oh, look, the SBS and the tax office talk to each other. And the information we're giving the ABS will go to the tax office as well, and they'll cross-check. Now, as it happens, the ABS has strict confidentiality guidelines and cannot even talk to other people in the ABS about forms that they have been looking at, okay? They can aggregate the data and pass that out, but you can't talk to anyone about it. It is confidential. And these poor farmers are sitting there looking at these two documents and deciding what they put in one that goes into the other. That is a reader looking at the potential reader, or thinking about a potential reader of that document down the track. So very sophisticated things are going on there, as between one person and another, or between one group of people and another. And that's very, very common. So when I sit and watch television, as soon as the ads come on, I switch on my make jokes and silly remarks capacity, okay? Because I know they are adverts, okay? And I couldn't give a whatever it is about the people who produce them. I think they are, parasites on society. But that's a whole other thing. And that's my own personal view, of course. But the little man sitting in the back of my head comes from an advertising agency, and he's constantly sitting there smiling at my thoughts. And I said, thank you, mate. I'll take your advice on whether this is important or not.
Wonderful. David, thanks so much. We reached the hour, and I would really like to thank you for this very enjoyable conversation and your talk and your slides. And I would like to thank Ruth too. I really think that she's in the background caring. The recording of this conversation will be on the Triple ID website soon, on our YouTube channel. And last thing that I would like to say is that the next conversation will be at the end of January. As soon as we know the speaker and the date, we'll publish that everywhere we can. Thanks again for everybody for attending. Thanks, David, for your presentation. Enjoy the festive season as far as it goes in the next month or so, and I hope to see you soon in 2025. Thanks very much.